Hey everyone, welcome to a new series on this channel. This is a roundtable discussion of audio evidence myth busting. We're tackling misinformation in the audio forums. Today I'm joined by Carey from Pipeline Audio. Aaron is a plugin developer and he's been a studio owner for over 20 years. And I understand that you have a very interesting connection to a popular DAW.
Yeah. So, I'm really not sure how to do this intro, but I was one of the original 3 developers of Reaper.
So, I'd love it if you could tell us a bit about your history and how all of that came about.
I kind of started out life as a guitar tech, but I got really good with, there's not much gear here in Hawaii. There's not much chance to get new equipment, and there's not much knowledge base. And so that meant that anything that broke, you better be able to fix it here. You got to learn how. You've got to be able to solder connections in a way that the sea breeze is not going to completely turn it white and intermittent immediately for all the guitar players and everything. Some bands that I was working with started bringing me into the studio with them, and I just really, really liked all the stuff, the knobs and the switches and all the activity. Like the Beehive is just periods of insanity and periods of nothing happening, and I just really was intrigued by this stuff, and I ended up going to the mainland, going to the continental United States and working in studios there. Towards the end of my time at the bigger studios was right when the digital audio workstations were coming out. Because of my studio's reputation, wasn't my studio, it's the studio I worked at. But actually, I'll tell you how I got the job over it. There was a studio in Arizona that put out a message for kind of a classified, but in the musicians network kind of thing, that they were looking for interns and stuff. We have the big recording schools right there in Phoenix, or Tempe to be more accurate. And so there was a line of people waiting to try and get in here. And they all had records that they claimed they mixed or whatever. And it's usually the student projects from these schools and stuff. And, I didn't have anything like that. And I just was in line with my soldering iron. Because that's really all I had, some wire strippers, a soldering iron.
It's a good skill to have, though. Yeah.
And so it was Jeff Harris of Village Recorders who was helping kind of go through the interns for the owner of the studio. And he saw my soldering iron and he sent everybody else home. And that's kind of how I got in there.
That's what got you the gig, yeah.
Yeah, and from there I was just soldering patch bays like mad for every artist you could imagine. That during that part of the 90s, the LA was going through a lot, fires and earthquakes and riots, 2 riots, and so people were leaving. And Nashville wasn't what it is now, and it certainly was even less secular than it is now, and a lot of artists really didn't feel like that was the place for them. And a lot of them were in Phoenix. A lot of them. We had a lot of stuff that I definitely had no business doing, and I mean it just read like a who's who of who's recording it during that decade was going through my studio. So it was a really crazy opportunity to work with people that I had only ever dreamed about meeting, and as that was winding up, the digital audio workstations were coming out, and the manufacturers were always around bringing their gear, and it really felt to me like everybody who was building this software had never been within 20 miles of a recording studio. They really didn't know. It didn't seem to me. I mean, now, I'm older now, and I have much more nuanced opinions or whatever, allegedly, but it seemed to me like these guys had no idea how we worked. And every time we asked, they would tell us how they wanted us to work. And a lot of it really doesn't work with what the customers want. And, for an example, one of the most popular DAWs of all time, and it was out at the time, the events, the items where you're looking at your waveforms and stuff, if you moved them, while you were moving them, it just turned into a big blank box. You couldn't see the contents inside. How are you supposed to edit when you can't even see what you're doing? And it was stuff like that just blew me away. The routing was pathetic. I mean, most of this stuff, sorry. Basically, I wanted a DAW that had a soldering iron, a screwdriver, handfuls of connections, and razor blades, And you would be able to just unscrew it and tap a connector in wherever you wanted. And just like we do in the real world.
So you took that kind of approach of being able to fix stuff yourself and being able to, get the gear to do what you want. you wanted to take that and apply it to the digital world in a DAW.
Yeah, and the crazy part to me is that, and I wasn't understanding this at the time, these aren't physical connectors you need to buy. You don't need to buy tubes. If you need 1,000 of them, you just duplicate the code 1,000 times, right? So it seemed to me like it wasn't any big deal to throw these connectors and stuff in here, but real-time audio and latency and all this stuff, there's a lot of factors, but even then, we still, I thought, should have been a lot further than we were. And it was from like day one of computers, I was chasing down these manufacturers and really trying to get something built. And at the time, I settled on Sonic Foundry at the time's Vegas. It acted the most like what I was used to working with mixing consoles and tape machines and all that stuff. But the routing was horrible. There were a lot of things, but Vegas had a identity crisis going into version 2 where they really wanted to stick with the video stuff, and they did a real good job with it, but us audio guys kind of felt left behind. And I think I had like a 100-page hand-drawn thing with just like how I wanted a DAW to work, and I was like beating up every manufacturer, showing them this little booklet or sending them like emails of fake advertisements for it that kind of showed what it should be doing and how it could work and everything.
So you did a lot of legwork on this.
Oh yeah, but
wow,
it was kind of overly ambitious.
Yeah,
I don't know if I was torturing everybody with this thing.
And what happened with it?
Pretty much, I was pretty hammering on people, and I just heard on a DAW Bench podcast that one of the guys that early on that I was trying to work with, he ended up making Ardor. I just heard on DAW Bench that this guy was actually one of the 3 original founders of Amazon, and he had never told any of us while we were working with him, which is pretty awesome. I mean, it's just a really cool guy who wanted to get things done regardless, but he was moving in a direction that really wasn't going to work for what I thought I wanted to see in a DAW. There's a large community that actually created a forum called Crossfade, and there was a lot of ex-Cakewalk users, a lot of people all talking about what they really wanted to see. I think a lot of DAWs were kind of born out of that, but from our side, Reaper was what came out of it.
So how is Reaper different from other DAWs?
That's a crazy question to ask now. Back in the day, I would say because you have routing and routing and routing. Any signal path you really want to pull off, you can do. Even stuff that's going to feed back. I think in Reaper you actually have to turn a switch on to enable feedback routing if something's going to happen, because you really can get in trouble quick that way, but it's still going to let you do it. That was the main thing. The routing was unreal. The coding was unreal. I mean, the original versions of Reaper would have fit on a floppy disk, no problem. And it's still pretty small. I mean, if you ever download and install Reaper, a lot of people are blown away just how quick it installs and what it is. And the efficiency of it, the main programmer is, say, just about unparalleled as a coder. He's unbelievable. When we were first developing Reaper, the first time I actually in person got a chance to meet the main programmer, Justin Frankel, I had a mixing gig over at Cherokee in LA, and it was a product Jay Carey and Chester Bennington from Linkin Park were producing of this of an Arizona band that was out there recording and mixing. And Justin came down so that we could really talk in person and figure this thing out. And in front of this, he was asking the staff, what would you want to see in software, and they were telling us, it's mostly routing stuff like we were talking about. And he put a keyboard down on the table and looked like he's just slamming on it, like you're not even typing anything, just random crap, just smashing this thing, and codes flying across the screen. And we had this new aux routing in real time as the staff was watching. I mean, it's pretty incredible to see the development of this thing go.
So what are some issues that you see with other DAWs?
In the old days, okay, well, no, let's not even say the old days. So I assume that by now, pretty much every DAW would be pretty close. You'd be able to do the same functions. We created a plugin for somebody that requires sidechain routing. Sure, most of the DAWs can let you sidechain now, but in this case, we needed to be able to specifically say which outputs things are going to go to, which inputs they're going to come from. And I thought by now every DAW would do this, no problem. No. Reaper has internally in every single track, it has 128 track channels. It's kind of a weird concept to get your head around, but there's a 128 channel mixer inside every track of Reaper, and you can route anything any way you want. Like you could view the patch bay kind of thing if you really wanted to go crazy. I thought that every single DAW would be able to do this today, and I don't even know that another one could. So every other DAW, we ended up having to use 2 tracks in order to do this sidechaining thing, and in that case, it ended up ruining the purpose of the plugin in some ways.
Yeah.
In terms of what else is different about it anymore, we used to have a list, and we could really say like what's different about this DAW versus other DAWs, and really we were happy to see the other DAWs checking these boxes off, and maybe it's not such a big deal anymore, but I don't know. There's still stuff that's different. I don't know if I can put my finger on it right this.
Well, stability is a big thing for me. Like I don't mind Pro Tools. It's great when it works, but when it doesn't, it's just like what is this? Like honestly, how is this the standard of anything? So if you can build something that works, I'm all in.
Yeah, I don't know if that's pure pain. Like, and that's the other thing. This is why I say, like, I had a hard time believing that these manufacturers had ever been in a recording studio, because when you have a customer behind you with their arms crossed, very upset, and you've got to get this stuff done,
and they don't understand. They don't know what the problem is. They just want it to happen.
They're paying by the hour, watching
you
you click your mouse around, and nothing's happening. Like it's dehumanizing.
Yeah. It's scary. You don't want to be there.
Just as an example, Justin has put a lot of stuff in here so that you can really see exactly what's going on in the DAW. When you're talking about stability, you can see the real-time CPU, you can see the real-time longest block, which I know people don't want to get crazy technical, but basically that's telling you how much of your allowed buffer is filled up by what plugins you're using. If that buffer gets too full, you're going to start getting clicks and gaps and pops on the output. Not necessarily the input, but definitely on the output. There's a guy out there, Vin Curliano. He has a site called DAW Bench, and he has been since more than 10 years, I think, doing apples to apples comparisons of CPUs, audio interfaces, things like that tell you how your DAW is going to perform. The guy uses Reaper for everything because of all the data that you do get that you can actually check this stuff on. So most of the official tests are in Reaper, but they have it for every DAW. But this is the kind of thing that kind lets you not only understand what's going on, but test what's going on and see whether or not these things are actually happening. How much is the plugin eating? What kind of problems are you having? Are you going to be able to put more plugins in? How much real-time CPU are you using versus how much total CPU? When you're talking about stability, having this performance meter right here really lets you know what could be causing issues, and gives you a real good benchmark of how your system's performing and everything. And so people are constantly using this window to tweak their plugins or their audio setup.
So I guess then pivoting from talking about DAWs to talking about plugins, you've been a plugin developer for a number of years. You work with AiX DSP, making plugins that solve real user problems. Could you talk a little bit about that?
First, I'll tell you how this company came about. I was working at Vintage. I was working at a very big studio. Some guy had come in, bringing his niece, and paid a boatload of money that I would never see in my life to record her. And this is really hard to put these kind of things out there, but his artist was stolen from him. And I knew right there and then I had to leave the official music business.
What happened?
It was really hard. Well, I mean, I can't be party to a thief like that. I don't like bullies. I don't like thugs. I don't like that kind of thing. And this wasn't a physical thing. This was just a straight up theft. And I don't want any part of that. I never forgot that. And so years later, Mike asks if I want to have a plugin company, years and years later. And that's how we came about. That's how AiX DSP was born. Really, the main thing I wanted was just, there were things that I wanted in Reaper, and I had been mocking up over the years, just to make everybody's lives a little bit easier. And I don't know, if you know Reaper, you can script things, you can do incredible stuff inside the program, but there were plugins that I kind of wanted available to everybody, Reaper or not. One of them was just this multi-band gate. I thought it was, something I've been working on for more than a decade, and just never really had a real version that everybody could use. More just JS stuff squished together and sort of working. Because I really can't program myself, just very basic stuff. So I did some things in Kako's, Reaper's WDL iPlug thing, but that was about as far as I could go. In terms of, latency or stability and stuff like that, that's just an ongoing fight. Like, to me, plugins are a lot less efficient and a lot less stable than they were just a few years ago. We're using Juice, and I know most of the industry is, and there's things I really like about it, but I see that we're having the same problems as everybody else running Juice is having.
What is Juice?
It's I think if I'm technically correct, it's an extension framework for C++ that has a lot of libraries and things that handle a lot of the stuff you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time from scratch in order to make software. So it has like graphics for your plugin, graphical user interfaces. It has DSP functions. It has a lot of incredible stuff, and it is an absolutely amazing product. But it's very heavy. I think that's the issue. But we're all working our ways through it.
But yeah, you mentioned the multiband gate plugin, and I think that's probably my favorite AiX DSP plugin because it's so brilliant. Like, when I figured out that you could key an input, like, to the attack of a tom or something like that, and then you could set, like, the low end to decay longer, and you could cut out all of the high end from, like, a cymbal, like, that's witchcraft. That's so useful.
If you were, before this company was around, and in fact, even before Reaper and stuff, if you found me online on a forum, most likely it was somebody asking or me complaining about how do you deal with cymbals bleeding into mics. That, to me, every single tom mic becomes an auxiliary cymbal mic. I don't care, like, everybody loves 421s. I've got piles of 421s out in the studio. I don't know if they're in that picture right there. I hate those things. Maybe if the drum player didn't have any cymbals, maybe it's okay. But they're just so big, and I don't know, they never really had the rejection that I thought they were supposed to have. Mm-hmm. Regardless, I don't care what mic you put on there. You're still dealing with that. And so a lot of my stuff in the early days was really about watch what the studio drummers do. You'll see that their cymbals are a lot further away from them than usually that you would think. A lot of them. Some of them not so much. The hi-hat is kind of farther away. It might be on a different plane than the snare drum.
And that helps to separate them in the microphone so there's not so much bleed?
Yeah. And sorry about that. Yeah. The idea is to make as much separation and discrimination as possible between the sound you want and the sound you don't want. And I was always trying ways to, like people putting the paint can caps through a mic. Everybody's trying all these different isolation things. But really, this is what so much of a forum discussion was about. I was always writing about how to record drums. And I mean, Reaper's Gate was a response to try and make this work right. When we made Regate, made sure that it had look ahead, it had both positive and negative hysteresis, and that you had a frequency keying, you could sidechain everything. So kind of wanted to put everything in the same noise gate. But again, it's just a single band, and so a lot of what Reaper ended up being was an easier way to edit drums. I mean, if you really look at Reaper, at least the first few years of it was really so specific about how can I edit drums quickly and know exactly what I'm seeing and exactly what I'm doing. But even then, just cutting up your drums by hand and stuff, it still wasn't quite right. Like you could draw out an envelope that you wanted. You could chop up the waveform exactly how you wanted. But you're still dealing with that same problem of those cymbals bleeding in there. And you had to make a choice between either a good sounding but way too short drum or a long drum with weird cymbal artifacts that pop in and out.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why multiband gate was really meant that I want to get the thwack of the stick with all that high end and stuff. But I only need that as long as that stick hits there. The rest of it, forget it. After that, it's gone. Any high end that you usually hear in toms that way, I swear it usually either comes off of the overheads or the room, or more likely it's whatever reverb somebody stuck on there. That's where that high end smack comes. So you only need that short initial impulse, to me.
That attack.
Yeah. And then you can shut that off so you don't have to worry about the cymbals. And then, with the low end, just leave it running for however long you want. That's really what that's about. And really, if this company didn't ever make a dime, don't let Mike hear this, but I want to make the tools that I want to use, because I don't want to be frustrated while I'm working. And if nobody else ever even uses this thing, there's so many haters at the beginning, like, oh, this thing's stupid. Why would you have this? I already have a noise gate. Well, no, don't use it then. I want it because I want to get my job done quicker and better. One of the things, like really, especially guys like Glenn Fricker, we aimed this right at him because he's constantly harping against people using drum samples and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, if you really don't want to use drum samples, here you go. Here's a way to really clean up your stuff.
It cleans it right up, yeah.
And you got to understand that this is, as long as it's been around, it's still, to me, it's in its infancy. This is the tip of the iceberg. I want to make the tools that do what we want. I always make the analogy, if you have to walk, you don't say, hey, okay, bend your knee, pick up your foot, lift, bend your foot forward, bend your leg, all these steps. You don't do that. You say, I want to walk. And I don't want people to have to think about all these billions of steps of how to get the sound that's coming in their head to come out the speakers. And those are the tools I want to make, is that there's still so much tweakiness. Even with multi-band gate, you still got to really, you really got to work this thing. And I want to make that work smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where you say, I want my toms to sound good, and that sound comes out of the speakers. And that's why this is in its infancy, and we are dedicated to really pushing this envelope. And I think there's technologies coming online soon that are going to just really change this game a lot. And I hate when people talk about paradigm shifts and stuff, so I'm just going to say that it should be getting easier and easier for you to get what you imagine in your head to come out of the speakers.
Yeah, and that's just it. But you're building the change that you want to see in the audio world, and you're making it easier for everyone who's coming after. Yeah,
and that's how it was with Reaper too. There was a time when Reaper was first built, I was kind of driving around the country and just seeing what different people, how they were using the product. There's more than one occasion where I got to somebody's place and I said, hey, what DAW are you using? And they're like, that's Reaper. I'm like, what? Are you wait, it is Reaper. Because it's so customizable, and people had changed it so much to work the way they wanted that, I like I said, I didn't even recognize it. And this is no different. Like, I owned a Jeep Wrangler for a while. I swear that the minute a Jeep leaves the dealership lot, it's already completely custom. You'll never, it's completely unique. Like, there's something about those things, people change every part on them and stuff. And that's the same way it was with Reaper, but it was exactly how we wanted. We wanted people to build the thing they wanted so that they didn't have to think about their software. And when I see some of the scripts these guys make, I can't even get my head around it. Like, how do you even use this thing? And it's so complicated, but to them, they built it the way they want to work, and they don't even have to think about it. And that's how I want tools to be. I want them to work the way you want them to work. And why should we still be dealing with dumb issues? We're on a computer. It's just like the routing thing. Like, we can duplicate this stuff for free 1 billion times. In the software world, we should be able to have a lot more control than we do in the hardware world. And I do always make that reference back to like patch bays and mic preamps and things like that. But we are in a different environment, and there are things that we can do that we couldn't have done in the analog world, and we should take more advantage of that. And I just realized that I left the air conditioner on, so there's a little bit of noise. I'm hoping... Jesus, sorry. Man, this is such a scramble morning. I was going to turn that off as soon as the camera went, so it's off now.
There was a word you said a while back, hysteresis. What does that mean?
Okay, let's say you got a noise gate. You've got a threshold, right? You could have two different thresholds. You could have an on threshold and an off threshold. And we could just use that term instead. Maybe it's a little bit easier. But the hysteresis... You could set a different on threshold than off threshold. If you're a guitar player, for instance, you may want your sustaining lead as you're vibratoing it out. You want that noise gate to turn off at a much lower volume than it took to turn that thing on, because that thing's got to tail out. On the other hand, something that actually Slipperman, if you're way back in the forums, if you guys ever read Slipperman's Recording Distorted Guitars thread or whatever, this is like a giant internet lore back in the day. He's actually, I think it's Tim Giles from Big Blue Meanie Studio. The guy did like all the early New York hardcore and like I think Anthrax and all that kind of stuff. He pointed out that with the positive hysteresis instead, you could keep a second drum from re-triggering when it shouldn't, especially in things like tom fills and things like that. And so the hysteresis in multiband gate is automatable, just like it is in regate, just in case you have areas where it's going to make more sense to leave that gate on or turn it off later. You could automate that. If you really mess around with Regate, for instance, I think that's the simplest one, because there's a free version in the replugs version that'll work in any DAW. You can go to reaper.fm, I think, and download it. That one has a hysteresis control, and especially if you're doing like guitar or something, if you play around with that, you'll see what that will do for you. It's just a little bit more having the thing turn on or off when you want it to, instead of just having one blanket place and hoping that covers everything. Man, this is the philosophy of everything, and I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but in everything, I've ridden freestyle BMX my whole life. One size fits all is not a good thing. Not when your life depends on it, and especially not when you have angry studio customers and you need to get things done. One size fits all is just a philosophy that barely ever works for a lot of things. And so having this separate on and off time control really lets you do a lot more. And that's how I want to get. I want to get as far from one size fits all in every single part of plugin development or DAW coding or whatever as we can, but without making it an analysis paralysis nightmare, which is the other end of that coin, or the other blade of that sword, or however they say it.
So Aaron, from your time at Vintage Recorders and working in studios for over 20 years, what do you see is missing from most home studios today?
Oh man, in understanding of the basics of audio, I think it's maybe not so important that people understand like maybe how to align a tape recorder or whatever. I don't think it's relevant to them. But understanding why, for instance, acoustics matter, that's a big one. Just understanding, like, I see people get nailed all the time on these forums, people talking about gain staging or whatever. Just understanding just how gain works and why that isn't as probably a big a deal as people make it out, and understanding the basics of digital audio. One of my missions, and you'll see me getting kicked off of forums and Facebook groups all the time for it, is that I just hate when people tell new studio wannabes or owners or whatever level they're at that they have to spend this money on this product and something that's completely irrelevant to what they're trying to do. And half the time the theory behind what they're trying to push is wrong. It's not even a real thing. It's just, and that's why we're trying to bust these myths, because here's how to get your channel demonetized. The whole Tonewood guitar thing, like the one real counter anybody's ever come up with was a Paul Reed Smith video where somebody plays a wooden xylophone. Like, I don't even know, but I always see people telling these new players they got to throw away their guitars and get one made out of a different type of wood if they want to use a certain pickup. And I'm like, man, that's not even how this stuff begins to work, and this is how they end up with the same problems with microphones, mic preamps, clipping where they don't want clipping. We got digital, you got 24-bit digital, you got such a wide range of stuff. You don't have to do like what we had, where we're paranoid. We got to squeeze everything into this tiny little dynamic range before the tape completely saturates, but above the noise floor. We don't have that. You got all this room. Like, it's an understanding of the basics of audio. That's where people hurt. And when people ask what's the best piece of gear in your studio, man, I'll show you right here. Any studio, you better have a soldering iron. To me, that'll save you a lot of money. But I guess if you're just recording your vocals and stuff, it may not be that important if that's all you're doing. But and again, something like a cable tester, really important stuff to have and understand. Basic stuff, balanced, unbalanced. Just understanding the basics of audio and why you would do the things we do. And nowadays I'm kind of paranoid about it because I don't want to keep anybody from trying something crazy that might end up actually really cool. My whole life I've been terrified that you get so jaded recording bands that you think, oh man, here comes another, I don't know about this band, and you worry that, are you going to recognize the next super band that you really like, or are you going to so jaded that you think, oh, that's just some guys that just suck, whatever. It's horrible attitude, but you get it when you record enough really bad bands. You're paranoid that you're not going to recognize those people. And luckily in my life, I did have kind of the second coming of the Misfits in the form of the band Calabrese. And when I heard them, I knew. And so luckily, but it's just those kind of things where, there could be a really cool sound and us old engineers are going to go, oh, that's not how you're supposed to do it. That's terrible. But no, it's really cool. And you're going to have to be okay with it. So I try not to to get too stickly-ish about this kind of thing, but at the same time, that old saying about it's fine to break the rules, but you should know them first, I think that's where we're really having trouble. One of my friends, Ethan Weiner, he wrote a book called The Audio Expert, and it really goes into all this, but I don't know if as a new studio owner you're going to want to open this giant encyclopedia of a book and learn all this stuff, but it is in there.
I had made a video a couple months back that explored the 5 essential pieces to a great recording. And I want to kind of share this with you, and maybe you can critique it or you can share your input on it. Number 1 was the performance. Because ultimately, you know, a great player, you know, you have Eddie Van Halen, you stick a mic in front of him, it's going to sound great. It doesn't matter. A good performance is a great performance. Yeah. Garbage in, garbage out, right? The next step that I put in there is the instrument. And not necessarily the tone wood of the instrument, but is the instrument in tune? Is it intonated? Is it able to stay in tune? Is it the right instrument to get the right tone? The next thing was the room. And this is the invisible force that is probably messing with your recordings because you can't see it and most people kind of forget about it, right? But I watched your other roundtable with Glenn, and he talked about, you know, the heavy guitars farting up his mix. And you said something about having like 9-foot long acoustic treatment or something to really like tackle the bass or something like that.
Vintage had what the bands and the producers and everybody called the chunk chamber, and it was this crazy room that was like in anybody's estimation was the biggest waste of real estate in the world. But this is Arizona at the time. Real estate wasn't that big of a deal. And this gave us the ability to put enough rigid fiberglass and soft fiberglass and everything else to, when you palm muted and you stopped, forget the noise gate, the thing stopped. I mean, there might be noise there, but that room was not talking back to that speaker. And it's just
dead.
It was like almost painfully percussive, some of the guitar notes you could get out of there. It was really cool.
So the last 2 things that I had on the list were the microphone and then the interface itself. And the way that I kind of thought of it is like at the beginning of that list, like the performance, that's going to change everything. But by the time you trickle down to like the microphone or the interface, it makes basically a much smaller difference. So, you know, you don't really need to worry about what mic works on your vocals until you know how to sing.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. You know, if we're talking about song wise, I'd take the writing before even the performance, because I think of all these. You know, I mean, it's the performance too, but again, go back to the Misfits. This stuff was recorded horribly, and most of the time it was performed pretty damn badly as well. But people will keep going back and buying those same albums over and over through history. I know I've bought like the Plan 9 Yellow Skull thing like probably 10 times in my life back in the day. The songs were just, you know, I'll take the good songs, but when you're talking about how things are going to sound, then your list is pretty much right on there. And to me, I look at it as doors. And really, you could even think of it as everything's the same size door. So you got the performance door. What's going to make it through that door? And then whatever made it through there is probably going to fit through every one of those other doors you got, unless you're really screwing something up. I have claimed several times that in reality, it would probably cost you more money to make a crappy mic preamp and interface than it would to make a decent one right now. Because the parts are already out there, the drivers are out there, everything's out there to build these things.
And the tolerance of these parts is much higher. This is what I've been learning, is you take like an older microphone, it's going to take 90 minutes to get up to voltage, and the tolerance between the components is so large that like the stuff they can do today is way more consistent.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And you know, like the old joke about, you know, nowadays when you buy the cheaper stuff, if it turns on, it'll probably sound good and last forever. And if it doesn't turn on, you send it back and Amazon will give you a new one. Yeah. And then that'll last forever.
Yeah.
And when I talk about interfaces, I'm usually more talking about the drivers, because as much as people swear up and down how much better this one sounds than that one, you know, I've got a chart on my web page where we test all this kind of stuff, and it's pretty much, it's close to ruler flat across the board for the cheapest to the most expensive. There is sometimes there's you know, amount of gain that a mic preamp could put out in an interface, or the noise floors to some degree, but I've never seen a modern interface that is so noisy that it would even be an issue. I guess if you were doing like violins from 80 feet away or something, but I mean, if you can't make a good sounding album on a, I'll say it, on a Behringer, you're screwed, man. I wouldn't buy one of the ones that doesn't have a real ASIO driver, but after that, they're so good. And same thing with mics. Like, you can get a cheap mic that works so good. You know, we had a matched quartet of M49s at Vintage, alongside all kinds of unbelievable mics that nobody's ever going to see again. You know, they were awesome. And yet I can get a $50 mic off Amazon, plug it in, not wait for it to warm up, and I know it's going to completely destroy any of my credibility and stuff, but I will take an artist happily singing right away through a $50 mic anytime over finagling my way through a $20,000 or $30,000 mic and hoping that, you know, everything's going to work, and, you know, never mind the noise and the distortion those things put out.
It's just extra liability and hassle. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. So what were your other things? Your room. I mean, nobody wants to talk about acoustics, and because it's not that glamorous. But luckily, some of these manufacturers have made it look in a way that people are like, oh, I want to care about this, you know. So that kind of helps. What's your other ones? Your performance, man. I mean, yeah, that's it's mind blowing to me, especially when I was learning. But over at Vintage, we often had super bands in there with their techs setting up everything. Like for instance, Megadeth, they leave the drum set up there. I would ask, you know, is it okay if I got a band coming in? Can they use this kit to record since it's already set up and ready to go? Sometimes the bands would the drummers sound horrible. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? Like, I don't, like, what happened? Did a mic fall off or did something get moved? Oh, my favorite one, we had Dokken in the studio, the drum set all set up. And, you know, Dokken is one of those bands where some of the guys are larger than life. The drummer, Wild Mick Brown, would refer to himself in the third person. And I was using their drum set because it was already mic'd up to record some local bands. And you know, we had a bunch come in. Some of them sounded good, some of them sounded bad. And I'm like, Mick, I don't get it. And this is just killing me. Like, half the time this drum set sounds awesome, and half the time it sounds like crap. And he goes, well, if you want your drums to sound big and wild, you got to have somebody big and wild, like Wild Mick Brown playing the drums. And he jumped on the drum set, bam, the thing sounded like explosions and cannons and gunshots, and everything sounded perfect. And then so the drummer of the band saw that and says, oh, okay, well, the drum set's fine. Gets in there, it sounds like total crap. So, you know, the performance matters. It matters a lot. It's crazy how people think that, oh, this guy owns this pickup and this guitar and this amp, so when I plug in, I'll be able to play 5,000 notes a second like he does. Nope. Good luck with that.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for sitting down with me. I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss Reaper and audio and, you know, just give us your whole perspective on the industry.
No, yeah, well, thank you. I tend to go off on long rambling rants, and I tend to get kicked off of a lot of places because of it. But really, I'm just trying to be precise about what I say. I wanna believe as many true things as I can and as few false things as I can, and it is important to me whether or not my beliefs are true, as said by somebody else. But that's a good philosophy for me.
Hey, if you guys like this video, let me know in the comments what questions you'd like me to ask Aaron, what sort of topics you'd like us to discuss in the next episode. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.